Hello, my name is Robert Goodwin, and this is Law on the Line. I'd like to welcome you back again, Judge Jorgensen. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I guess you reprise the role as the author and expert on the Hall Mills murder.
Good to be back. Thank you.
Thank you. And so last time when we were here, we talked about all the preliminaries up to the trial, and today we were going to discuss in depth the trial of the persons who were accused of this notorious crime.
Sure.
By way of background, just to give us a little, for those who are not familiar with it, a little background, and then we'll go right into the trial.
Certainly. In September 1922, the Episcopal pastor of St. John the Evangelist Church on George Street, New Brunswick, apparently had been having an affair with one of the choir singers, Eleanor Mills. And the two of them were found shot to death, lying in the Lover's Lane in Franklin Township, just over the Middlesex County borderline. And so that was in September of 1922. Mm-hmm. A grand jury was formed in Somerset County because the bodies were found in Somerset County. And the grand jury did not come down with any indictments. They had 67 witnesses over the course of a week in November, and they didn't come up with anybody that they were going to indict. In part, it's believed that Frances Hall, who's the widow of the pastor, has ties to the Johnson & Johnson family, and it was speculated that perhaps some of the Johnson & Johnson fortunes were passed around a little bit to some of the witnesses to testify or not to testify.
So there was a hiatus of about 4 years until things got hot again, and yes. That's where we want to pick up. But
sure.
What happened in those 4 years, and what's...
During the 4 years, it was a cold case. Although Charlotte Mills, who was the daughter of Eleanor Mills, kept on pressing whoever she could get the ear of to bring the case back to resurrect it. But it wasn't until the summer of 1926 when an editor for the New York Daily Mirror decided, and that was a William Randolph Hearst newspaper, decided that perhaps there might be a way of selling some newspapers. And he found out that the husband of Louise Geist, now Louise Geist was one of the maids at the pastor's home in New Brunswick, found out that she was being, their husband filed for divorce, filed for an annulment. And he said, well, Louise told me that she was paid $5,000 from Frances Hall on the evening of the murders, and that she went with Frances Hall and Willie Stevens, that's Frances's one of her brothers, that they went to the site where the bodies were found, and she was involved in it.
He wanted to know where the money was.
So he filed for divorce in July of 1926. Well, Philip Payne, who was this young new editor for the New York Daily Mirror, picked up on that. And next thing you know, there's front page practically every day of the New York Daily Mirror. The New York Times started putting front pages. And then ultimately, the governor of New Jersey, A. Harry Moore, finally decided, you know what, I'm going to appoint a special prosecutor.
And who was that?
The special prosecutor was Alexander Simpson. Here's a picture of Alexander Simpson. Alexander Simpson was a sitting state senator from Hudson County, and he was all of 5 feet tall.
Wow.
When he got involved with it, he immediately thought that this is a good way, it'll be a good boost for his political career.
He had political aspirations.
Exactly, higher than just being a state senator from Hudson County as a Democrat. And so he got involved with it, and they started digging. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that they were looking for, like some of the autopsies were missing, some of the information wasn't around, but ultimately they were able to get the case back on track.
And do you recall how many witnesses they called at the second grand jury that was reconvened?
At the second grand jury, I believe it was about 80 witnesses that they called.
And between the actual grand jury indictment, and who did they indict at that point?
The Somerset County grand jury that was impaneled for this purpose, they indicted 4 people. There was Frances Hall. She's the widow of Edward Hall, the dead pastor.
The deceased.
The deceased. There was Willie Stevens, who lived with Frances Hall and her husband at
Is that dim-witted Willie?
Dim-witted Willie, as the media called him. And then there was Henry Stevens. Henry lived in Lavallette, New Jersey. And then finally there was a fourth defendant, and that was Henry Carpenter. Henry Carpenter was a cousin of the Stevenses, and Henry lived over in New Brunswick as well. And so all four of them were indicted by the grand jury.
And what role did each of them have? Purportedly, Mrs. Hall was charged with what?
Well, all four were charged with the murders of the Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills. So that it was believed that the trigger man at one point was Henry Stevens, the brother from Lavallette. There were also people that believed that the trigger man was Willie Stevens, and that Henry Carpenter was the person who drove them, Frances and the others, to the site to get at the lovers out there.
To the Lovers Lane.
To the Lovers Lane.
Which is right off of Franklin Boulevard.
Yes, it is.
Currently, yeah.
Right.
It's hard to believe that what is there today was Lovers Lane and a pig farm and an apple orchard and all the relics of the past.
Yes.
I have one question, though, that you piqued my interest. You said that Eleanor, right, Hall, her daughter wanted to find out more about the murder of her father.
No. Eleanor Mills.
Mills, I'm sorry.
Eleanor Mills. Charlotte Mills was Eleanor's in 1922, 16-year-old daughter.
Uh-huh.
And her parents, Eleanor, the deceased choir singer, and her father, James, were not getting along for quite some time. And in fact, Eleanor had moved out of the master bedroom in the apartment and was sleeping in the bedroom with Charlotte for several months before they were murdered. So she was very hurt. She thought that her mom was being railroaded, and she wanted justice to be done.
I see. Okay, and Charlotte ultimately disappeared, if I recall reading. In terms after the trial, she sort of vanished from the picture. Is that correct?
She ultimately died of cancer.
Oh.
And she was in the 1940s, and I believe that she was living in Metuchen, New Jersey.
I see. And so she wanted to find out whether or not her mother was murdered, and by whom, of course.
Sure.
Wasn't there at one point some accusation that perhaps Mrs. Mills' husband, who was mild milquetoast kind of guy, who was also working at the church, I know, might have been the trigger man on this?
There was some of that speculation that was going on, and that was really provided by the what was referred to then and now as the $1 billion defense team. Here's a picture of those defense attorneys. There were 7 attorneys that were hired by the 4 defendants to represent them. And Robert McCarter, who had been a prior Attorney General for the state of New Jersey about 1904, 1905, somewhere back then. Clifford Case, who was a senator from Somerset County and was the last Chief Justice under the prior New Jersey Constitution, prior to
1947.
Prior to 1947. He was the last Chief Justice. And so they were real high-powered. And during the course of the trial, they were trying to intimate to the jury that, you know, it's not these 4 defendants that are sitting up there. Really, it's that James Mills guy. He's the one that also had a motive. He supposedly had found some love letters that were being passed between the two of them in a sack at the Mills apartment the night before the murders. And he ended up selling some of those to the newspapers for about $500.
$500. Okay, so let's go back into the courtroom. This did take place at the Somerset County Courthouse, the iconic classical-looking structure
Yes.
in downtown Somerville.
Right.
Building is pretty much the same today. You mentioned in our last show, and people want to listen to it, please listen to part one. But the hole in the stained glass ceiling, and where they peered, cameras were pointing down, and and this was a spectacle of sorts.
It really was a spectacle. Here, there's a picture of the day one of the trial, and you can see there's just people all over the place on the outside of the courthouse. The courthouse had been built in 1916, so it was 10 years old at the time of the trial. This is the trial started in November of 1926.
So describe what was going on in the courtroom and how did the case proceed?
Well, first off, there was a decision by the prosecutor, some pretrial measures that were taken. The four defendants were, again, the widow and her two brothers and the cousin, Henry Carpenter. The prosecutor decided to try the three siblings and did not try Henry Carpenter initially. So they severed the case against Henry Carpenter. And then Alexander Simpson, the special prosecutor, also decided that he's going to try the three defendants, the three siblings, for the murder of Eleanor Mills first. Mm-hmm. And then at a separate trial, try them for the murder of Edward Hall. So that was a tactical decision that was made by Simpson in this trial.
So how did the testimony go, and who were the state's star witnesses, and how were they deconstructed, if you will, by defense counsel?
Well, the prosecutor called 67 witnesses to the stand. The trial took 5 weeks. Okay. There were a total of 157 witnesses that testified during the course of the trial. 157 witnesses over 5 weeks. You can well imagine that.
Yes, 30 witnesses a week. I mean, wow.
Just going and testifying. They were also trying the case on Saturdays. So they would break for Sunday, but they would try the case Monday through Saturday.
Was that a precedent that had been established prior to that?
It must have.
Okay.
I only surmise that. But the media was all over it. The courtroom was packed with reporters throughout the trial. It was also packed with just people that were coming in, had nothing better to do than listen to this trial, because it really had everything in it.
All the elements of a great soap opera or more.
Absolutely, yeah, certainly.
So the first state witness that was called by the state was whom, if you recall?
I don't recall.
Or significant witness.
The first significant witness that was called was Charlotte Mills. She was the daughter.
Yes.
And she was able to testify about what her mother had done on the evening of September 14th, which is of 1922, which is when the two of them were murdered late in the evening on that day.
And apparently, her mother had met up with the minister, I believe, at their house.
She had called. The pastor, and Louise Geist picked up the phone. She was one of the maids at the Hall House. Picked up the phone upstairs, and looking down the stairs, she also saw that Frances Hall, the now widow, had also picked up the receiver. So Frances, the intimation there is that Frances heard the conversation between Eleanor Mills and her husband. And apparently there was a decision that they were going to meet out by the Lover's Lane area. There had been an abandoned house out there, and apparently that was a trysting place for folks that.
But I thought there was an excuse being made about some medical bills that hadn't been paid, and the Reverend was going to go to Mrs. Mills's home.
Yes.
To go over those bills.
Yes, earlier in the year, and in January of 1922, Eleanor Mills had an appendix operation, and the bills were being paid for by Edward Hall and Francis Hall. Francis was good friends with Eleanor Mills, and apparently that was part of the ruse that so there's a problem with one of the bills being paid. They were paying it on I think it was $10 a month. They were paying off the hospital bill, and so he was indicating that he was going to be going over to the Mills apartment to work on that bill.
And they lived on Carmen Street.
They lived
correct?
on Carmen Street,
and that was a much poorer area of town. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
And there was an economic real disparity between the reverend
Oh,
and
yes, yeah.
the pastor and
Yeah, the pastor married well.
he married well.
Married into money, and
that was the Johnson and Johnson money.
yes, yes.
And they lived in a beautiful home, which is now the home of the president
Of Douglas College.
of Douglas College.
Yes, 23 Nickel Avenue in New Brunswick. Still there. Beautiful place.
So when the Mills, when Mrs. Mills and Pastor Hall left New Brunswick and ultimately arrived at Lover's Lane, who put that testimony together during the trial as to the observations of their movement?
Well, the big anticipated testimony was from Jane Gibson. Jane Gibson is also referred to by the media as the pig lady, or the pig woman.
And I think you mentioned that earlier, that she had a pig farm.
She had a pig farm. She had a couple dozen hogs. She was growing corn. Her place was about a mile from where the bodies were found.
She had a mule too.
She had a mule, Jenny's mule. And so Jane Gibson, a couple of weeks after the murders were done, came forward and said, on that evening, I saw some people, and I heard three or four shots, and so they started asking her questions about it. And she's the one that is now putting it all together, putting Francis Hall at the scene, because she sees this white-haired woman there. She's putting Willie Stevens at the scene. She initially also puts Henry Carpenter at the scene. So she's going to be the star witness, so to speak. And it's not going to go all that well
for her. Now, comparing her testimony before the grand jury, and she did testify before the grand jury.
She testified
in 2022.
And 2026.
Was her testimony consistent, or was it all over the place? Because I remember there was reference that she was not known to be a very truthful person per the neighbors.
That's absolutely correct. Every time she told the story, it was a little bit of a change, and ultimately, I mean, she was telling the people because the papers love to quote her because they're not going to know what she was going to say, and she ultimately said that she was going to be the Babe Ruth of the trial. Babe Ruth was obviously a great Yankee baseball player back then, but she was going to be the star witness and really be the one that's going to bring it all together, hammer it home, and get these people convicted.
And what actually happened when they brought her in? And I know if people watched the prior episode, she was brought in from the hospital. What happened there, and how did that go? What kind of spectacle was that?
Yes, it was a spectacle. Early in the trial, Alexander Simpson wanted to have her testify, and she was in the courtroom. And then apparently she developed some type of a stomach problem, I believe it was. And they ended up taking her to a hospital in Somerset County, in Somerville. And Prosecutor Simpson was not fond of that. He thought that this was some shenanigans that Senator Case, one of the defense attorneys, was pulling to get her away. And so ultimately he sent out word that he wanted to have her brought into court the next day. And instead the doctors came in and they said, "You can't do that. She might die if she comes in and testifies." So Simpson said to the judges, "Well then, I want you to go with the jury to the hospital and we'll take her testimony in the hospital." And the judges said, "Well, we're not going to do that, but we will go and see what the story is." So at the end of the testimony one day, the judges went to the hospital, came back and said, "Well, we're not going to require her to come here Simpson, again, thought that there were shenanigans going on, so he wanted to make sure that she was properly being cared of, so she was moved from a hospital in Somerville to a hospital in Jersey City, Hudson County.
In Jersey City, okay.
In Jersey City, because that's where he's from, and he knows that she'll get good care there. So ultimately, on the day that she was going to testify, they put her in an ambulance, and they bring the ambulance down to Somerville. Here's a picture of the pig lady outside of the courthouse, going into the courthouse. And then they bring her in the courthouse, and she's going to testify from a hospital gurney. Here's that picture that piqued my interest with Judge Meredith, taken from up top, and you can see the courtroom is packed. She's flat on her back on the hospital gurney. The prosecutor's right there, the defense attorneys are right there, the defendants are all there in the well of the court. And just before she's about to testify, a woman jumps up and starts screaming, "Liar, liar, liar." Well, apparently it was the pig lady's mother.
Oh, wow.
And the testimony that Jane Gibson gave in the courthouse, the defense attorneys really took her to task on cross-examination. And when that was finished, typically, as a prosecutor, you want to try to
Rehabilitate.
Rehabilitate, and Simpson didn't really have any additional questions for her.
So there was no recross.
No recross, and so they were
redirect, I should say, right?
She was taken back to the Jersey City Hospital, and on the way they stopped for ice cream, and that's all we got there.
Just remind the audience, because who may not have seen the prior show, about how they took that picture of her on the gurney.
Well, there is a picture from up top, as you can see.
Right.
It's looking down. And Judge Meredith, Arthur Meredith, it was his courtroom in the early 1980s. That's one of the first cases I tried, was in that courtroom. He had that picture in his chambers, and he told me that the way that picture was taken was the dome ceiling in the courtroom was Tiffany, and that one of the photographers had gone up and poked out a small piece of the Tiffany dome ceiling and shot that photograph through that.
Did they ever replace the broken piece of glass?
When they repaired and renovated the historic courtroom, they touched up the Tiffany ceiling dome, and they left a clear piece where the panel had been knocked out.
So, as I said, next time I'm there, I'm looking
You're gonna
up
have
for
to
that
look
clear
up.
piece.
Yes.
So what happened? So the pig lady testified, and the defense made maybe pork chops out of her, but that's a terrible joke. But in any event, who else testified, and how did the case fail to convince the jury?
Well, there was quite necessarily expert testimony as well that was given. There was testimony about a calling card for the pastor had been found with fingerprints on it.
And that was found at the scene.
At the scene, propped up against his left foot, on the bottom of his foot.
And he was laid out with Mrs.
Mills right next to her. And the fingerprint expert in the United States came to testify, and he testified that the fingerprints on it were the fingerprints of Willie Stevens. The defense indicated that this card had been sitting out there for a couple of days. The chain of
custody
was just all messed up, and so there was that testimony. There was the testimony from the bullets. There's a picture we have of Eleanor Mills. It's a caricature showing the bullet wounds. And
she had 3 bullet wounds in her head.
Three bullets to the head. They had also cut her from ear to ear, cut out her larynx, and cut out her tongue, and so that's depicted also in this photograph that we have here. And so, the state, they did the best job that they could. Simpson did the best job that he could in presenting the testimony. But then it was the opportunity for the defendants to take over, and as I said, they really had an excellent defense team of attorneys. And a little bit unusual in a capital crime, the defendants testified. That's not always the case.
And how did Mrs. Hall come across as a witness?
Frances Hall, here's a picture of Frances. Now, you have to understand that Frances, in 1926, when this picture was taken, was about 51 years old. She looks considerably older than that.
She does, and she's considerably older.
She's about 8 years older than her husband, her deceased husband.
And Mrs. Mills,
yes,
for that matter.
But Frances Hall, she testified. She had been placed under a lot of pressure for the 4 years during the time period. She often would have permit interviews with the media, with her attorneys being present, and all along denied that she did anything, denied that she had any idea at all that her husband was having an affair, that he was faithful to her, and she never had any inkling otherwise. But she testified, and she testified in a forthright manner, and was very consistent.
What about the two brothers? You know,
they also both of them testified. Now here's Willie Stevens testifying. Everybody thought that Willie would crack because, as the media called him, the dim-witted Willie Stevens. When he started off his testimony, apparently it was his birthday, and they said, "Well, how old are you?" And he says, "I'm 44 years old," and he was very happy about to say it. And the defense attorney said, "Well, isn't it 54 years old?" "Oh, yeah, 54.
So what about his other brother? So we have to wrap up because I got the 1 minute warning.
Okay, so he testified, and he did very well. Henry Stevens, who testified that on the night of the murders, he was in Lavallette, and he had pretty good backups for that.
I know he was a fisherman, and that's what he says he was doing that day.
Right, and he had neighbors testifying that he was with them. And then it came to December 4th of 1926. The jury was out for a couple of hours. They came back, and the headline that was on the New York Daily News was "Not guilty." Not guilty.
Yes. Simply that.
Yes.
Now, and you wrote a narrative, a play,
yes,
along with your wife about the trial, and you described in much more detail, of course, than we can do here.
Sure.
The characters that were a part of this this saga, the trial of the century, at least 1920s version.
Yes.
And I know that the Inns of Court is going to be showcasing that again.
Yes.
And that's going to be when, Judge?
June 22nd and June 23rd, a Saturday night, 8 p.m. and a Sunday, 3 p.m.
And, that will be done in Old Bridge at the local theater, Main Street Theater. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And actually, it's going to be a fundraiser for the Barr Foundation that sponsors this show, and for the theater.
For the theater, yes.
And I hope that everybody can join us and join you and your wife, I know. And be the jury.
Be the jury. Yes, we have the jury act. The audience is the jury.
Is it going to be a little bit of question and answer after the show? Is that something that you've contemplated?
We're contemplating doing that for this.
Great.
Yes,
that would be great for the jury. Maybe we'll have to poll them.
Yes.
Well, Judge, I got the signal that we're over. I can't believe another half hour of. It's just this goes so fast, but it's fascinating, yes. And I'm so glad for. Your expertise and your willingness to impart this tale, of which is truth is greater than fiction.
It is, yes, indeed.
Isn't it?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
You too.